welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who is resolved to no longer peek his head into passenger cabins.
Tim Longo. What?
For your New Year's resolution, you're not going to go poking your head into every passenger cabin. Didn't you do that on the SS Anne?
Oh, right. Nice. Yeah, pretty much invaded every cabin in that place, and
I knew you would because
took some fools out.
I had so little space for items that I was like, oh, I guess I'll just come back. And then as soon as you leave it, if you've done the stuff below, it just takes off. I'm like, oh, I guess I won't then. So I missed about half of that stuff. Anyway, we are, of course, back to talking about Pokemon. Happy New Year, sir.
Happy New Year. Yeah, we're in it. It's happened.
New Year is actually one of my favorite Pokemon. So that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. That's funny. Did you name one of yours New Year, or you're just...
No, I haven't caught any since the New Year. So, but I might. I might. If I can find one that matches up well, I will
Baby
do
New
so.
Year.
Yeah. Baby New Year. That's right. I'll find a little baby Pokemon and name it New Year. Anyway, we should probably, just off the top, we should probably talk about what our rotations are right now, just so people know where we are.
Yeah, that's a good. I was going to say, I was talking to my wife and daughter about playing the game, and I played a little game with them of real Pokemon name or not. And so I would say random words and then throw in some real Pokemon in there. And they got all of them wrong. All the ones that were actual Pokemon names, they got wrong. They're like, oh yeah, there's no way that's one. like Jigglypuff. Even Jigglypuff they didn't know. So or Wigglytuff as the evolution is. It's one of my favorites. So my rotation, I've kept some of the ones I had before. I have Ivysaur right now still. And then my Geodude has evolved into Graveler. That's my sort of rock and ground type. I still have my Butterfree going strong, and I've actually beefed that one up. I'll talk about later. I picked up a Clefairy. I think that's how you say that. Yeah. Which is now a Clefable. Right. And I don't think I had that last time. And then my Jigglypuff's a Wigglytuff. And then I recently picked up a Doduo, right, which is the two-headed bird.
A Doduo.
A Doduo, right. Okay, there you go. Doduo. It's like a dodo, I see. Yep. Two-headed dodo as my bird, because I needed a bird for a fly HM. So that's my crew. And then I'm around 32, 33, 33. I have a 29 and 27. So that's about where I'm at. As is probably obvious, I did not make it to all of the badges. I almost have my fifth, so I have a couple more left after that. So what about you?
So I have taken a different tack, and I've been not leveling evenly. It was pretty funny. We were talking in pre-show about, they're all around 32, 33. I'm like, oh yeah, that's not me at all. So my current rotation is, I guess I'll go from top down. I have a 53rd level Charizard named Prince. That's my main, from the original pick.
Right.
Pidgeot. Pi the Pidgeot is level 45. Then it's Dux, who's the Fear Fetched I traded for. He's level 30. Then I have Beedrill, named Weezer, who is 23. Opie, who's the Drowsy, that's a psychic type, is 20. That's a makes him sleep, as you might guess from the name. And then finally Dory, I just added, is a Lapras, water ice at level 17 that I've been leveling a little bit. I had meant to put a Magikarp in there to level a Magikarp because apparently that's a thing people do. But yeah, so I've gone a totally different way. Whereas I tend to go through trainers with a low level Pokemon at the top who comes in for the first battle, and then I keep swapping that out and then have a higher level one just come in and dominate after that. I'm usually a good 20 levels over what I'm fighting. And that makes the battles fairly easy. So most of the time, in fact, almost all the time. Occasionally I'll have to switch things up, but it's pretty rare. So yeah.
I haven't had too much trouble up until recently, and I think I just need to do a little bit more leveling. But having them all at that level gives me a lot of flexibility to bounce around based on what the type is. If I'm still kind of experimenting or figuring things out, because it's sometimes not obvious what the counter is going to be. But it's interesting that it definitely allows you to take these two different approaches, and it still generally seems to work. With being able to progress, you just have to use your strategies a little differently. So it's a pretty impressively deep game.
Yeah.
Way crazier than I guess I'd ever given it credit for, or really thought of. I mean, it's just, especially with the way that you can augment and choose the abilities for each of them. So you're almost leveling all of these different characters up at the same time. Well, you are. So it's well beyond, a party of 6 or something in a way, if you're trying to kind of have some on standby, or kind of swapping them out based on what types you're going against.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of the reason for that, for having this sense that it was not as deep as it is, has a lot to do with, I mean, one, our age at the time, but also just the fact that the sort of cultural signifier, if you weren't playing the game, the cultural signifier was probably the TV show, which was a cartoon, right? I mean, so you kind of had this assumption that, oh, this is aimed at pretty young kids, maybe 7 to 10 or something like that. But it really is surprisingly deep. I mean, we've talked about it on each of the last 2 Pokemon episodes about how overwhelming the amount of information that you seem to need to know is.
Yeah.
And also, of course, how little of that is actually directly given to you by the game. So there's a lot of stuff missing, and so you're sort of figuring things out, which gives a sense of adventure. I mean, I think that's good for kids. They want to experiment. I think it encourages some good values as far as that goes. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting.
The sense of discovery is definitely there, and I've appreciated that. And as I said, I think last episode, or one of the last episodes, that I'm actually still a convert. I'm still enjoying the game, despite both of us spending just about the same amount of time, even though I'm behind. I think the opacity of the game is the main thing that's kind of getting in my way. And I'm, some of the sense of repetition and grind gets to me from time to time too. There's definitely a lot of battles, that feel like, especially with the trainers, where it's like, you're clearly just doing it to level up, and they're really not much to them. And like I said, repetitious and not that much fun, because I've found a few formulas that I can just repeat. And I know enough about some of the rock, paper, scissors system to exploit it / use it effectively when necessary, because I have a bit of a variety within my crew. But it's just the opacity. I think of some of that is, like we talked about in the first episode, probably some of that I think is really related to being a Game Boy game, and some of the limitations that they probably were up against there. And they had some they continue to use some of the clever design choices that they went after when it comes to giving information via NPCs, but you can very easily miss those NPCs if you don't talk to literally everybody, which I try to. And I pretty much don't think I missed too much. But there's a lot of hidden stuff. There's a lot of, especially the mazes and the puzzly kind of stuff. It's been frustrating at times, and I think it slowed me down. and ironically, that stuff tends to not have much to do with the actual combat system. It's just, as a segue to sort of one of the other topics that I wanted to talk about this episode, that this session has proven to me, and I just didn't see it coming because I think I had these preconceived notions about what Pokemon was. There's a lot more of an RPG here than I had anticipated. It is a real it's a real RPG for the most
Yeah,
part.
for
It just
sure.
has this crazy system of the characters you're leveling, but structure of it, the sort of lock and key, the flow of the world design, NPC interactions, sort of light story here and there, and sort of faction relationships and all the kind of stuff that's typically there. It's not Final Fantasy IX or anything like that, but it's. I just always had thought, wrongly so, that it was just this landscape for going around and collecting Pokemon and having them battle. But there's a linearity to it, and I just never got far enough in, I think, to see that. So that's been a big surprise. Basically, it's been a nice surprise for me because I feel like I'm playing something with some structure and thrust to it, rather than just kind of wandering around collecting and fighting.
Yeah, no, I mean, totally agreed. I think that, I mean, basically your character is whatever your current set of Pokemon are, and the choices you've made, and how to level them up, and what's important to you. I mean, you can tell, right? There's not a dominant strategy here. I'm playing very differently from you are. I was looking at the types. I have three of them are flying, two are sort of normal primary, and one is fire. And then it's one that I've just added, and I don't even remember before. I think it was also a normal type. I mean, I've not had a huge amount of variety,
Mm.
and haven't been trying to achieve a huge amount of variety. I just kind of put things on and mostly use my couple dominant, and occasionally I'll go and level something lower just because I'm planning ahead a little bit. I'm a little fearful of the end of the game that this might not be a viable strategy. Um, I might be now playing the Bard class in Pokemon. I might get to the end and find I'm not so well supported. But I can always go and grind it, so it's not, that wouldn't be the end of the world. It wouldn't be great, but it would be amusing to me if I got to the end and you were able to finish the game in 10 hours less than me because because I had taken this approach. But
Mm.
yeah, I mean, that catch 'em all being the tagline, got to catch 'em all, I think also is another reason why you might think there isn't this depth here. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because that they didn't focus. I don't remember, and even I guess even today, I don't feel like people tend to talk that much about it in that more traditional RPG sense. They still focus on the Pokemon themselves, just anecdotally, and I think that's appropriate. I mean, I've also been, now that we've played so much and we're deeper in, I've also been happily surprised by the zaniness of the Pokemon. I just never, as I think both of us, and myself specifically, have admitted, that this is a franchise that passed me by, and I just kind of chose not to dive deeply into it for the sort of fear of the depth of what I can get obsessed with. And so I wasn't educated, but every new Pokemon I see, it's just freak crazy.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
there are some wacky, just both all the way from adorable to completely disturbing to what's going on, who thought of this thing, you know. And I think that's kind of a cool thing, but I think it does hurt the opacity problem to some degree because I still can't quite figure out what the exaggerate exaggerate
Hmm.
execute, what's the
Yeah.
egg, the egg one that is like a big egg with a bunch of little eggs around it. I still can't figure out what type that is, so I don't know how to counter it well. And I eventually find stuff, and that's actually a question I forgot to ask you in pre-show that we should hit later, but I'm interested to know how much you have been assimilating the rock paper scissors rule set as you've been playing. It sounds like maybe you've been brute forcing enough where you haven't had to, um,
Yeah, I
but have
mostly
you been
haven't had
actually
to. I
picking
mean,
things up?
yeah, I sometimes do. I tend to play in long stretches, and sort of the information kind of accrues. But if you ask me, like right now, point blank, what counters this? What counters that? I go, I don't like, I wouldn't be able to tell you what I fought anything with. I just kind of blindly go through it. If something's really not working, I switch. I kind of reason about it. I do occasionally keep a tab open with the type chart. Just in case, right? I mean, just in case I get to that point where the brute force isn't enough, but I am usually so over leveled compared to what I'm fighting that it's just not an issue.
I think
I go through these gyms like a hot knife through butter. Really, it hasn't since the first one really been an issue for me. So, I mean, I think the riskiest times in the game have been in the mazes, the cave that you go through near the beginning of the game, and then that maze later I forget what that one's called, but is that Mount Moon maybe that you go through? Or
Mount Moon's the first one. The second one is the rocky tunnel.
Oh, right. Yeah, the rocky tunnel.
Tunnel.
Right. Yeah, that you have to use flash in. Right.
Yeah, that you have to use flash, which you have to go back. Yeah, just really quickly, I've also been happily surprised by the structure of it, and when it comes to shortcutting and stuff, right, where they're opening up the world more and more. It starts very linear, actually, more than I really thought about, I guess. And then when they start opening these shortcuts, whether it be the guardposts or, obviously the cut ability, or once you get through certain places, like those tunnels. One time, I forget what it is, but I think it's probably the guard post, or maybe it's something else that you can get back through cut or something. You don't have to go back through it a second time. So it's, Dark Souls-ish in that regard, but it's pretty traditional stuff as well. So that's been kind of nice because it's felt like the world has been, and now we have bicycles and teleport and fly, so we actually have a lot more flexibility now. But it's a nice escalation of world structure stuff as well. But yeah, back on the rock, paper, scissors, I've actually been, I think because I enjoy it, I've been intentionally trying to figure some of that stuff out. And so, like, for instance, I don't know if this is the case, but because I haven't actually done the research, but my impression is electrical does really good damage against birds, maybe, or flying things, but birds specifically. And so,
right, because it's lightning coming out of the sky, I think.
Yeah, that's my, exactly. Yeah. And I was going to say, to your point about, like, you haven't had trouble and you're kind of over leveled, so you can brute force. I think I'm wondering if another secret sauce to this game, and this is obviously to some degree a JRPG thing at its core, so it's not really completely innovative in this game, but I think because of the Pokemon structure, it is different from other JRPGs. The fact that I'm a kid who would like, say I love to be obsessed with the rock, paper, scissors rule set. And so as a kid, I study that stuff, but some kids don't care about that stuff. And so they do have this option where they can grind and over level and kind of, for the most part, ignore that stuff and still enjoy it and still finish it. And that's a flexibility that a lot of games from a difficulty standpoint don't have for kids, where there's usually a wall of some kind that you hit that you have to figure it out. Yeah. But here there's a lot more flexibility.
Yeah. And the other thing too, is that because I've played this game entirely on stream, I'm often during the combat, not really thinking about the combat all that much and really saving my attention, right? Because attention basically is a resource, right? I'm saving my own personal attention for the RPG stuff, the quests, and just paying attention to the world when I'm going to places. And it's kind of interesting how that changes how I play, because I am somewhat, to a degree, performing, right? I'm trying to make it fun for people to watch. I'm having so when we're in the combat, I'm just having conversations with people in the chat. I'm mostly just mashing the button. I'm not really even paying attention to what's going on a lot of the time. Or I'm making, sports commentary style commentary on it as it goes. Oh, the quarterback is toast or whatever. But then when I'm going around in the world, I'm actually reading out things that I see, and I'm calling out, and I think it's imprinting better in my memory. So somebody asked me in stream today when I was playing a different game, how was it for you to do the guard key, which is where you have to bring them a drink? I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that, because when I went into that building that had that department store, basically, I went to every floor and talked to everybody, and all of that stuff kind of went in. There was other stuff too. There was a polka doll vending machine, and this girl in one of the towns wanted a polka doll. I was like, oh, I know where that is. And I went and got it and brought it back. And all of that stuff is just imprinting pretty well. And I think that is changed by the stream. That said, I totally forgot what the Poké Flute did, even though I made a note that I was like, oh, that's cool. You have a thing a permanent object that heals status effects. And I thought that was kind of a cool choice, but I didn't write down what status effect it dealt with. And so then when I got to the point with the Snorlax, I was totally lost. I had no idea. And those are the times when I actually lean on the chat to help me get past stuff, because I had no idea. I went to that thing because there's two different roads you can use to get to that same pinch point. And I went to it from one direction, and I'm like, I don't know what to do here. And I basically went back. I might have flew back or something like that, and went somewhere else, and then came at it from the other direction. I was like, I'll just use the other road, and it came to the same place. I'm like, oh man, what do I do now? So, and one of my Swedish viewers was laughing at me. I was like, I never played this game, dude. What do you want from me? I haven't played 6 different Pokemon games or whatever. So I don't know, but it's very funny that way. So,
well, just those sorts of lock and key, RPG lock and key quest kind of things are I just didn't think this game would have them. Even the concept that there is this flute, that, to your point, it's actually a nice bit of design to have a double purpose there, right? Both progression lock and key, but also permanent status effects for being asleep. By the way, the Snorlax is maybe the most frustrating freaking Pokemon to fight, because he's just falling asleep and reviving himself, or just over and over again. So I basically just run away. I can't even capture him because I can't get him down low enough. Ironically, my Ivysaur has that same ability now via a technical machine, so he can do the same thing. So now that I have the flute, I can combo that. I can have him basically rest like the Snorlax does and fully heal, and then just wake him up with the flute.
Oh, interesting.
Myself. Yeah. So I've actually, it's interesting you mentioned the way that you're playing via the stream versus myself, because I'm actually having a good time getting into not the math of it, but the rock, paper, scissors and kind of the nuance of it. I've been doing very little, web searching and stuff, only in a couple stuck places. So I haven't really looked up, like, other than the chart that's in the manual, I haven't been looking up anything, but I have been trying to pay special attention to when the battles are happening, all of the different status effects and the amount of damage things are doing. And so, and not only are there the types per Pokemon, but another note that I wrote down is there's also some rule sets that seem to be emerging, and I could be totally wrong on this, so this is just my impression watching sort of all the stats go by, but there's also sort of a sub-layer of rock, paper, scissors based on abilities, and secondary types. So for instance, I ended up finding that Dig is pretty effective against certain types, and so I put it on my then Geodude, now Graveler, and really good against ground normal types that are on the ground, bad against flying creatures. But Geodude didn't normally have that ability. I gave it to him later. And so this concept that, of course, digging coming up from below on a flying creature is not going to do anything, and that's not just a type, that's because there's multiple types that fly. But that's sort of like another sort of vector of insanity with the depth of this game, that makes sense once you think about it, and put 2 and 2 together while you're watching it happen. But again, not explicitly out there for you to read about or anything. So it's been fun for me to really, like, because I'm playing with earbuds in, I'm playing by myself, very focused and I wouldn't say I'm full min-maxing, but I am going pretty deep in what I would say, quote unquote, the design of each of my Pokemon. And I guess as a segue, we could talk about the technical machine stuff too.
Yeah, because and it's interesting because I've used I guess they're called HMs, right? The ones that are usable in the world.
The multiple.
Right.
Yeah, and you can also use those on multiple. You can give those to multiple.
You can use them as much as you want, right? And you have to. That has to be there, right? Because you have to. You can't.
Because lose it. It's a critical path.
Exactly, it's a critical path. You'd lose it, and the game would be over. So that's a forced design decision, which totally viable. You want to be able to use those things in the world somehow. Use the Pokemon in the world somehow. I think that's a great decision.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, it's good design, and it makes a lot of sense, and it makes it feel connected, right? It makes it feel like the whole game is one thing and not two things, right? It's not, when I'm in the overworld, I'm just Ash or whomever running around. And then when I'm in the battles, I'm my Pokemon. It's no, I'm all the time. I'm both.
Some of the technical machines give you that ability too, though, right? They're not critical path, it seems like, but because I think teleport and dig are not HMs. I think they're TMs, right?
Right, but do you need those? I don't know that you need those.
No, you don't need those, but you can use those in the world. Pokemon can use those.
Oh, yes. Yes. Oh, yeah. Yes.
I don't know what, other than teleporting you back to the last Poke
Center.
Poke Center. I don't know what Dig does yet, but I haven't found a place for it. But you can use it in the open when you're not.
Yeah, I wonder if that works together with the item finder.
Oh yeah, maybe so. Yeah,
something like that. I don't know. And I'm sure I'll get an email. We have an email for later that has a litany of errors and corrections.
Sure. We're just making this up as we go.
Yeah.
Like we're playing this game as if it had just come out and we were children.
Yeah, and we don't know anything, right?
And we don't know anything. We're discovering it. I think I actually, despite all the errors that we're probably making, I actually really like that we're playing it this way.
Oh yeah.
For the podcast, because it is this, we're not coming in with these other than our preconceived notions of just being around it for so many years. But you know what I mean? We don't have a history with it.
We don't have a strategy guide that we're propping open and going, I want to try it this time. We're going to do a 6 Magikarp build, or whatever. So
no, I have no idea. Like I'm sure that people have developed these amazing strategies over time, just with this one game that seems the simplest of them all. But anyway, sorry, you were talking about HMs.
Yeah, well, HMs and TMs. Yeah, I mean, I was commenting that I haven't used a single TM. I just take them and they take up space in my inventory, and I just store them. I have a huge list of the ones that I found. I found, I don't know, 3 dozen of them, say, 2 or 3 dozen of them. I guess I did put water gun on one. I didn't remember doing that, but I guess I did. I guess early on I was like, I guess I'll use a couple of these. Yeah, it looks like I used a couple. I must have had a rock type that's it's named Balboa, so it must have been Rocky. So and then I have Frittata has the water gun. I forgot that I had done that as well. But then after that there were so many. And I just was like, you know what? I'm just gonna keep putting these in the bank, and I'll come back to it. Yeah, I see. I have Dig. I have that Mega Punch that you mentioned pre-show. I have a lot, and there's some I think I've stored that I haven't even used. So,
did you use Teleport?
I have not.
Yeah, see,
I'm not even sure I found Teleport, or if I did, maybe I didn't run it to find out what it was, and I just stored it. Yeah.
Because that one teleports you in anywhere in the world. You can, non-combat, you can teleport to the last Poke Center you were at.
Yeah.
By using that. I mean,
once you fly,
you don't really need it. Yeah, but I mean, that's just again another sub layer that's pretty impressive that they actually even did. I mean, it's really interesting. Does the stream comment on you not using the TMs, or do they even care?
They don't seem to. I don't remember that anybody said, "Oh, you should totally use that." I can't remember anybody saying that.
I'm just curious on what the the modern wisdom has become for those things. So to counter Brett's approach to the TMs, as we talked about in pre-show, I'm actually completely the opposite. So we're basically playing this game completely differently from each other in almost every way. And so not only am I leveling all of my Pokemon up evenly, but I'm trying to strategize how to use the TMs and trying to figure out. Of course, the only bummer thing is you can't respec them, so once you put it on one, you can't really move it. So you can only override it. But occasionally you'll find a couple twice, but it seems like. But
yeah, and that's been the thing that's put me off of it, is that I'm fearful of making a mistake.
Yeah, it's fair. It's fair. I think I'm just enjoying the experimentation of it, and I definitely have overwritten one or two that I regret overriding for one that is less interesting to me, I guess I'd say. Mm-hmm. But I've very some of them are a little more obvious based on the name. Like there's one called so to give you an example, which I was telling Brett in pre-show, on my Clefable, I sort of happened into a spec for that one that is sort of like a basically turned it into a electrical type, not a type. Obviously, I know it's not changing the type because it's a normal base, but I've given it both the Thunderbolt and the Thunder Wave or something like that.
Right. Yep. Thunder Wave.
And so because I don't have a Pikachu or anything. So when I have a need for electrical damage, I bring the Clefable out and use those abilities from the TMs on them. And as Brett was saying, I'm not surprised to hear that using the TM of the type, the same type of the TM on the same type of the Pokemon probably is more effective, because you probably get a bonus or something by putting a fire TM on a fire type. So I'm not surprised to hear that. However, I haven't noticed because for instance, if I use that electrical ability, Thunderbolt, or whatever it's called, the damage one, not the debuff, on against a flying bird, or I think maybe water it works well against, I think.
Yeah.
They're one-shotting those critters,
because they're super effective, right? So
I feel clever myself, and on my Wigglytuff I have Water Gun, and so when I need a water attack because I don't have a water Pokemon, I bring that out, and it can one-shot often, so it's cool. That was another whole layer another sort of surprising, unexpected turn for me of just because with the TMs, every time I get a new one, I put it on somebody. Like I have not left.
Oh wow!
I only
they were totally different.
Well, and I think what's ended up happening is my individual Pokemon have become these Frankenstein monsters of because they don't have their original abilities anymore, and they have a bunch, like my Wigglytuff also has Mega Punch, so it's like I have this is that the physical? I think that's called the physical type of attack. I had this physical attack with the water gun, and then he has Sing, of course. And then I forget the fourth one. Bide, which I'm still fooling around with. I'm not sure I like that one, but although I found one good use for it, which is the Pokemon that have the abilities that hit you multiple times in a round, repeatedly, where you kind of are essentially stun locked, are very frustrating. But if you have Bide on while they're doing that, then all that damage they're doing to you, you get to throw back at them. So that's the only good use I've found for Bide, because you can't really do anything while they're
while they have you wrapped or something.
Yeah, they're just hitting you over and over again. And so if you've executed Bide before that, then that's it feels like a cool, smart counter strategy. I don't know if it actually is, but I feel clever. But that's my main thing is I just love these sort of mini specs that I'm fooling around with. And so because
it's funny though, because you're like the Mr. Nature guy, and you're off there making these gene spliced Frankenstein monsters. Whereas I'm like, Mr. Programmer Tech guy, and I'm like, I'm going to keep all my Pokemon all natural.
Weird.
I'm not going to modify them. They're beautiful as they are.
It is weird. We're going against type here.
No kidding. Wow.
Although they're called technical machines, so I guess in my head I'm not. They're augmenting them in some way. I don't know.
Whatever helps you sleep at night.
Yeah, sure.
Arthur Midlands.
Oof.
Arthur Daniels Midlands. I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, it's just I've just been surprised by this whole technical and hidden machine subsystem, and that there's so much thought put into that stuff. And I'm sure I'm not being as efficient as I could. Like, again, I'm not min-maxing per se, but I am trying to pay attention.
No, but as we've pointed out, the game is flexible enough to allow for all of these different approaches to work. And so the guy who's going in and button mashing just because he's busy entertaining his stream can totally play this game, and also the total strategizer, figuring out how everything works and using everything as appropriately. And in some way, you may be more efficient in the sense that you're going to maybe be able to finish the game with lower level Pokemon, or you may simply be just by the nature of how you've been approaching things, end up that way. Whereas because I've mostly stuck with the same Pokemon, like Prince, Pie, Weezer, Ducks, those have all been with me pretty much from the beginning, right? So those are some of my earliest Pokemon. And the other two I added, one I just added just literally the last session in the 1 hour I played before I realized I already had 7 badges. I just added that just on a lark, just like, I should add a water type and level that for a while, just out of, just to see, just to use something different because I had so many of the same types. But that replaced, my Rattata, which was whatever the highest Rattata is. So.
It's really, it's astounding, to be honest, the sort of flexibility and slop that this game has. And I mean slop in a good way, just you can really kind of fumble through it and kind of just experiment. And, of course, with the grind structure of your traditional sort of JRPG allows them to do some of this, but just within the sort of diversity and mixing and matching of just the systemic nature of each of the statistics on these suckers is just kind of mind-boggling. And the fact that we know that the number of Pokemon only go up from here over time, and I forget the number you quoted before,
802 or something like that, something truly absurd.
It's just crazy. And I know that you can already see some of the themes when it comes to variations, like a lot of, abilities share, though the effects might be different, they share some of the statistics. So I know that, not every single thing is unique. They're definitely sharing, but and that's a good thing from a usability standpoint, right? To have some of those commonalities, you need that.
You have to, otherwise you have nothing to grab onto. So you definitely, you have to have that.
You have to have some of that consistency, but as I think you're proving too, you don't need to have it in a digital sort of way, right? Where if you don't get it, you're gonna be out of luck.
Right.
So and then even I think we talked about it maybe the first or second episode, but even my Butterfree is still going strong, and I would say maybe a cornerstone of my whole team now. And I think because we talked about that Pokemon, which was definitely a name that I told my wife and daughter, they're like, no, there's no way that's a Pokemon. And I was like, nope, that's one. But because we talked about that one early on, and it evolved from the Metapod or whatever, which was sort of like this weird useless Pokemon, it seemed like. I've stayed committed. I'm committed to make Butterfree work.
Wow.
And so I've given...
You heard it here first, folks.
Well, I've given him Confusion, which has been like a really, I don't know why all the time, but a really powerful ability, especially against Zubats and things like that. I mean, it's just one-shotting stuff left and right. It's very powerful. And plus it also has a side effect because you can confuse things as well as do damage.
Right.
And then has another psychic blast of some kind. And then for a while it had a sleep ability through one of the TMs. So it's my butterfly is kicking butt, and I just love that I can do that. It's just very surprising to me. So yeah.
And then
Something else, man.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Another topic we wanted to hit, and then I want to talk tech, is your collection strategy, which I gather from pre-show is basically not so much.
Yeah, no, I've
for either of us really. So
yeah, I mean, to be honest, the thing it's the usual thing that bumps me out sometimes about the way that we play for the podcast is I'm kind of avoiding grass,
yeah,
and avoiding the times, not doing a lot of fishing and things because of time, and you had revealed to me something that I'm really kind of pissed about now, is that the level cap, if you will, for Pokemon kind of getting unruly is only related to traded Pokemon.
Right. And that's something I learned from the stream. I don't know if that is I don't have a manual, so I don't know if that's revealed to you, but that's what I'm told.
It must be in there someplace, and I just missed it because I just have a PDF of it, but of the manual. But yeah, so I've always been under this paranoia of kind of like, and I actually wrote notes down about this sort of interesting choice of having this sort of level cap. So it's forcing you to move forward to get to the trainers, to get that essentially level cap upped for yourself. So you can't really just stay in one place and grind endlessly with the same Pokemon, because but apparently that's not the case. Anyway, so the reason I wasn't doing a lot of kind of grass hunting and stuff is I didn't want my Pokemon to go up very fast. I was trying to thread the needle. And so what ended up happening when I got to the level 50 cap, which I think is Celadon City, Erica maybe, is like almost all my Pokemon were at level 30 or so, and one of them leveled up during that battle into 31, and so I felt in my head I felt like I just made it, and I just got the badge, it upped it to 50. So that's why I wasn't doing a lot of like grinding before that, because I was starting to hit that cap. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's mainly a time thing, that I just haven't been collecting and searching for them.
Yeah, the other thing for me has been that when I have gone off into the grass, what I've typically found is that the Pokemon are so low level relative to me that, first of all, it's difficult to battle them and not kill them. So that's a thing. Or make them faint, I should say.
I've killed so many that I didn't intend to, including a Pikachu.
Yeah, my Pikachu. Really, the Pikachu happened. That happened in my first half hour or hour of the game. So it was, but also just, I keep running into ones that I have. It's a million Pidgeys or, evolved Pidgeys or whatever. And so I just I'm like, well, okay. It's frustrating to go into the grass and just keep running into the same things that you see all the time. So yeah, I just, at a certain point I was like, you know what? I guess I'm just sort of not interested in doing that anymore. So
it's the case that different areas of the grass have different things, though, right? Have you been
that I've heard is
testing?
True.
Yeah. Because I
haven't found it. Yeah.
When I dabble here and there in some areas and different, places later in the game, definitely different things are coming up. So the fact that sort of there's essentially, spawn tables for each grass area of potential different types is also kind of mind-boggling and overwhelming to me. So, I mean, I can completely see how kids back in the day when this came out sunk their lives into this game. Like it's astounding, and to have it on the Game Boy, like it's kind of blowing my mind about the possibilities. And for a kid to see this, just how, especially once the world's opened up as much as it does, once you get like Fly and stuff.
Yeah. I
mean, you can just zip all over the place and just experiment and explore and trying to get all of them. By the way, I was going to ask this, when you like when it comes to the numbers, like each Pokemon has a number, the evolutions are counted, right? So when you evolve, you basically have caught a new one.
Correct. Yes.
And,
Yes.
and it's listed, right?
Yes. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And they're usually sequential. So
yeah, right.
it's like 1, 2, 3 might be, I don't know, Caterpie and whatever it evolves into, etc. Yeah. I did, while we were talking, look, and it is actually in the menu, but it's in the trading section with the GameLink cable, which is something you probably wouldn't read. But it explains how, first of all, traded Pokemon level faster because they get experience point bonus. But if your badge doesn't match their level, the Pokemon can't be controlled. So it explains that in the trading section, which is not, since you wouldn't be trading at this point, there'd be no reason.
Does it say if it counts for trading with NPCs? Because they kind of show you. In fact, there's one NPC.
It does, and that NPC, the one that I did trade, does level faster.
I did that same one, but I didn't keep that Pokemon. Yeah, that shows you the whole process.
Yeah,
but is that's considered a trade as well then, even though it's not a real person?
Yes. There was a place where I literally said, "Oh, do you want to trade? I'll give you a fear fetched for a whatever I had," and I gave it. It was something I probably had more than one of, and so then I had a fear fetched, and
it was a Spearow. Spearow was the trade, I think.
Oh yeah, I traded the Spearow. Yeah, that's right. That was Spearow. That was Spearow Agnew. Agnew.
I knew it. I knew it. I was about to say it. I knew that's what you named that one. It's too obvious, I guess. Yeah, I did that same trade. I was just curious if it counted in that rule. Even though it wasn't.
Does. Yeah, it treats it as an actual trade. Yeah.
I mean, that's another. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, because I was going to move to the technical stuff next.
Well, yeah. Before you do that, the last thing I'll say on the trading and I don't want to promise that I'll do this, but I have it in my mind that by the end of the series, I'm going to try to produce some sort of formula on the beauty of this franchise via this game, because I have these literally, and I'm just kind of collecting these little variables to create a formula out of. But anyway, another formula that I didn't mention that we just happened into right this minute was the trading aspect of it. There wasn't anything else. Maybe we did talk about this before, I forget.
No, we haven't. No.
There was nothing else. I mean, the Pokemon had the link, or I mean, the Game Boy had the link cable, and a few of the games definitely were using it. But the concept that I could get a Pokemon on my Game Boy and have the two different colors as well of the carts, and then to have one exclusive on each. And then the concept of me being able as a kid to trade that over to somebody else and there be an actual advantage to it. And then also just to kind of, for the collection aspect, that's just another mind blower.
Yeah.
It's just like, geez, there's just all of these things that are in this one kind of franchise that all mix together for this recipe of I'm just kind of flabbergasted by the whole thing, to be honest. And I definitely want to play more.
Yeah.
I'm actually excited to try the Switch version.
Well, I have it, so I'm looking forward to trying it.
Cool.
Yes.
Which version? Did you tell me which version you got?
No, the Pokemon one. I actually had it from our super fan.
Pikachu
Had 2 copies of the Let's Go Pikachu. So
Pikachu. Yeah. Okay. So maybe I'll get Eevee.
In case we want to trade.
I'm serious though. We gotta do. I've heard that sort of the quality of life and usability of that one, even though it's a little bit more sort of dumbed down.
And they have made some simplifications to some of the quest stuff. I think somebody mentioned on the stream even today that that lemonade or drink puzzle for the guests. I mean, get it. For the guards, rather, to get a drink and give it to the guards to open that way, I think is rephrased in such a way that it makes it very obvious. Oh, in order to pass by here. Because it's basically the same structure as Pokemon Red Blue, I gather. Yeah,
that's why I'm excited to... Yeah. It's sort of like playing A Link Between Worlds, which I was also happy to finish after we played Link to the Past, because structurally there's a lot of similarities, but it was just, it was a complete remake. So it was fun to play those essentially back to back. But but so what was your technical topic
Right.
you
So
wanted to hit? I was intrigued.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about how the technology of the Game Boy influenced the design of so many of its games. And this is not obviously something I ever programmed for, so I was kind of in the dark as to how it worked at all, because I knew that some cartridges were bigger than others. And that's kind of a recipe for disaster sometimes. So I was a little, well, how did that work? The first carts, your Tetris, for example, and I don't even remember what else at the beginning, were 32. What?
Metroid 2, I think Metroid 2 was pretty early.
Yeah, but the very first carts were 32K carts. So little, right? I mean, half of my old Apple II. There's a little bit of in Game Boy memory. I believe 8K. I might be wrong on that. I can't remember now. Anyway, you've got this 32K of memory, and I'm like, well, how did they expand that to be a meg? The Pokemon Red and Blue are a megabyte. And the way that they did that was that they expanded the chip. So basically you could talk to other hardware, right? There were different things you could plug into this. So they had built into their instruction set some way of communicating with basically other chips. And as it turns out, on the carts that are bigger than 32K, there's a memory bank controller chip that was made by Nintendo. And basically it allows them to page 16K of the 32K of memory that you normally address, and basically have a bit of information that says, oh, when you're asking for the bytes in this address range, then you go to this part of the chip memory, the actual memory. So it's like a virtual paging system, memory paging system, driven by this specific chip. Multiple types of chips were made, which makes it even more confusing for people trying to write emulators and things like that, because there were like 5 main types or something like that that Nintendo manufactured. And nobody makes these really anymore, although I gather there are some Chinese knockoffs. So you can't, but these weren't off the shelf parts. They were custom made for the Game Boy. But basically, so that's why you have these battles where you've got, a trainer, and the trainer slides in and the trainer slides out, and they all follow the same pattern, because they can, in the lower 16K that isn't allowed to change, they can have the program that basically drives that, how the battle works, right? The code that actually drives how the battle works, but point to addresses that are in the upper memory, the 16K that gets swapped out. So it's basically like, it's like
early streaming.
Yeah, it's like taking one piece of paper that has some lines drawn to the edge, and then having a bunch of other pieces of paper, but all the line, like it's like you're making a diagram, but you can make lots of different diagrams from it if you just line up these other things. You see this in board games sometimes, where it's like, the edges match up, right, in the same way on everything, right? And it's basically how it works, is that these things are going to address a certain part of that memory controller chip, and basically, right, and that's why it's that sort of format. It's just interesting to me how that kind of technology constrains the design.
It's not only, that's awesome. Thank you for doing the research on that.
I was darn curious. I was like, I'm kind of curious about writing Game Boy. What would it take to write a Game Boy game? And I will put in the show notes, I don't remember his name now, but somebody did this in 2017 and wrote it up for Gamasutra, which is an industry site for development, and had a couple of articles, and actually made actual carts that were 32K carts, made a fairly simple game. But was hugely helpful for me understanding the memory model and why this was a thing. So kudos to that person. I'll put his name in the show notes and the link to the first article, which is where most of this information comes in. Anyway, you were saying.
Well, just to your point about, like, there's also there's the constraints of the technology, but I think the key takeaway for me is how they designed around it so they could utilize this system. And the irony is that that structure that they designed for this technology ended up staying in the franchise for so long. It sounds like, you know what I mean? Like they didn't change that formula. It sounds like maybe only up until recently have they started to change some of that formula up. And it definitely got criticism for that from time to time. I will say the franchise did, for not evolving enough. But then the irony is that some of the underpinnings of how that structure actually, why it flowed the way that it did, was coming from the Game Boy carts, and kind of taken for granted of like, well, that's just how Pokemon is. This is how it flows, whatever. It's like, actually it had to do that,
right?
To some degree. And then they just kept
and
it.
I think it also leads to some of the things we've been talking about today, where it's like there's these patterns, and like you can just rely on these patterns are going to be there, right? And that's basically what's going on. Instead of having, I mean, it really allows them to limit what they have to know about the Pokemon, right? There's no complicated process to figure out, okay, what type of this thing is this? Okay, does this thing match? It's like, no, literally take this value in this specific address, multiply it by the value in this specific address, and you've got some result, right? And it's I mean, it's sort of how you used to do things. You would never do it that way today.
Like assembly.
Right? Yeah. I mean, you had to code in assembly back then. Oh, don't even get me started about the music chip. Because that is controlled by 5 hardware.
I don't want to get you started.
5 hardware registers that you have to specifically put values into that control the music. It's 5 values that actually control how all the music works. It's astonishing. They have to code it basically to time it. They have to put in the instructions at the right. Oh my God. It's just amazing to me that could ever play music. So yeah, it's wow. That's a whole different thing. And it's kind of beyond scope because I didn't go into it in too much detail. I just went, that's madness. It's like, how do you compose by writing assembly, which pokes values into these 5 registers at specific times in the frame. It is specific moments in the frame because it has to be at a certain time. Otherwise it's not going to play the music that you want. It's wow. It's maddening.
Well, I mean, I think that's why the Game Boy was so astounding for its time. And also it's interesting. Is there also a connection to a theme we talked about with Final Fantasy IX specifically of a bit of the cultural game development differences when it comes to hard coding and custom content for especially JRPGs, right? Where we talked, I think we did. Oh yeah, we
definitely did.
Where they're sort of like, they'll hand code something for a specific moment for this one section rather than make it modular.
Exactly right. To call back to that, I mean, they literally wrote different programs on the PlayStation 1 that would run. So you just run literally a different program.
Exactly. Like the card game or something like that. Yeah.
And the PlayStation 1, I think, could reboot fast enough or basically halt execution on one program to run some other program very, very quickly. And so you could just do that. Jesus. You basically were resetting the machine to do that. So yeah, it is a similarity.
It's crazy. I know. I mean, yeah, no, I mean, I love it, but it's still the history of how we've gotten here.
Yep.
So interesting.
It was blowing my mind reading it. Okay. Well, let's reprogram our brains for a minute and then we'll come back and do a little bit of feedback.
Oh boy. All right.
Welcome back from the break. We have a few pieces of feedback this time. I want to remind folks that reviews are a great way to help us reach new listeners. If you haven't previously reviewed us or even just rated us via that podcast app, that would be splendid. As you might have caught last week, we also particularly enjoy those singing reviews. So I put that at the end of the show. Do we? I do.
Okay.
People who watch me streaming see me singing all kinds of goofy stuff. So
all right, I wasn't sure if you enjoyed it or not, but
oh no, I'm
still
I'm
mixed
all in
myself. But
yeah, I'm sure that's because you're tone deaf.
Uh-huh.
But we enjoy having whatever review you care to write. So thank you very much for those. If you have a minute, anyway, we have a few pieces sent to devgameclub@gmail.com this week, and you, sir, have the first one.
Yes, subject is the computer having all the fun, from Esther Olson. Dear Brett and Tim, right now I'm in my first ever Dungeons & Dragons campaign, and I find that the connection between D&D and JRPGs like Pokemon is extremely vivid. In D&D, combat comes down to the roll of a die, and when you're playing with your friends and you're on the spot, rolling that die is exciting. And then parsing the result of your roll is a task in and of itself. In Pokemon, combat still comes down to the roll of the die, but in contrast to D&D, parsing the result is the computer's job, which makes you more idle. Reminds me of something Bruce Shelley keeps saying, the computer shouldn't have all the fun. The player should have the fun. Now that Tim has played more than one JRPG, to which extent do the two of you feel that the genre's D&D inspired combat is an idle activity? Does the computer kind of hold out on you in those games? Regards, Esther.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I would say because I'm streaming, as we talked about earlier in the episode, I don't pay as much attention to the combat really, and so the fun for me is kind of performing and sort of talking about what I expect is going to happen. Like I'm using my best Pokemon, so I know it's going to rip through the other one pretty fast, and so I'm just trash talking the computer basically. I guess what I would say about the dice rolling and then interpreting the results and all of that is that that's actually just a different kind of fun than I think the sort of repeated combat of this game is. In the sense that this is more, I think actually Marc LeBlanc, who was a Looking Glass guy, described 8 kinds of fun, and I think that's actually might be his. That might have actually been his blog title at one point. But one of his types of fun was submission, and which didn't mean anything sort of kinky. He just meant being forced to abide by this rules and sort of this repeated aspect. I mean, he's basically talking about grindy combat, which some people really enjoy. So I think I think that the type of fun that's being had here is different from the type of fun that you're having in D&D. So the computer's having one type of the fun, I guess. But I don't really miss it myself. I don't know where you are on that.
Yeah, I mean, as you were talking and formulating my answer, my answer is very similar, if not the same. I just think they're basically, yes, I agree with Esther that this is what's transpiring. However, I do agree with Brett that they're basically just different goals. And the beauty of it is that both exist. And so there are times for me that I do want that idle RPG feeling. That's one of the reasons why I play WoW today still. And I know what I'm getting myself into. And then there are times when I do want to sit down at a table and spend an hour on one encounter, on pen and paper, and those can be very gratifying. And when you're done with it, you can feel epic. Maybe I'm exaggerating with an hour, but they can be long for just one encounter if it's a lot of players and a lot of enemies, and maybe you're using miniatures or something as well as die rolling. But that is a lot of bookkeeping and that is a lot to be doing.
Yeah.
And there's times when, I mean, some of my personal revelation when the gold box game started coming out and they were emulating D&D rules was that, wow, look at all this stuff that it's doing for me now. And they're sort of like, wow, okay, well, I can just sit down by myself, and yes, I'm missing out on that social encounter, the social engagement, and I'm missing out on the bookkeeping sort of aspect of it that I do love. But there are times when, I mean, I don't play D&D right now, and I haven't in a while, but I miss it. But I never play D&D every day, or multiple times, even in a week sometimes. So, but I can sit down and play WoW for, even just 30 minutes, and kind of do some of that, like you said, submission kind of feel. So
yeah,
I think I
yeah.
agree.
The other thing,
they're both valid.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking is that, as you mentioned, some of these battles with lots of enemies, and I mean, I've had some recent battles in my own D&D campaign. I'm DMing for my son and his friends, where I start to lose them because there's just too much going on. There's too much time between turns, between individual player turns. Even though something's always happening, there are people who just start to tune out. And that's when they maybe check their phone or whatever, and I'm actually actively, as a DM, trying to work away from that, and I will probably end up having to write more of our encounters with the goal of novelty and maybe advancing the story in mind. I've been relying mostly on older modules and things like that, and those were notoriously kind of lent themselves to these sorts of things. So I just need to really sort of, some of our most successful ones have been against one enemy, and them having to work together and figure out what they're going to do, and maybe that enemy summons something or whatever, but it's been pretty focused and it's advancing the story. So it's actually minimizing some of the die rolling, even though that lends lots of drama, but minimizing it so it's not constant, and hiding that stuff as much as possible has been helping my campaign. I've noticed when it works and when it doesn't. So I think when it's new, you love it. You want to see every number and you want to think about it and all that stuff. And then for me, and apparently for my players, there gets a point where they're like, okay, there's too many. I've seen too many dice roll tonight. I want to do something else. So yeah, who knows? Anyway,
did you ever play any Rolemaster stuff? That system? I think it's called Rolemaster.
No,
it was
I don't know.
Older system. Yeah. Anyway, it was sort of, back in the day, it was sort of the example of the opposite of that, basically focused almost entirely on statistics and charts and outcomes. In fact, there was actually charts that actually you would read based on the outcome of the die roll that you had to read. And so it was kind of, it was the complete opposite of that. And it's just such an interesting comparison to D&D, because I think D&D, even though it does have its die rolls, it is pretty fast and loose. It can be, and Rolemaster is just this hilarious, like, extreme, and people.
Yeah, I've definitely heard of it, but I know I haven't played it. And then I have also played stuff that's entirely the other way. Like, I've played, I think it was called Saga System, which was a card game. Like, Marvel Superheroes had a card game that was made by TSR at the time. And this is easily 35, 40 years, probably close to 40 years ago, where it was just, you had a deck of cards and it had to do with your heroes, and they could use, depending on what heroes you were using, you had, you could basically use different cards that you had in your deck. But you had to basically narrate what was happening to make this kind of cartoon battle. And the DM's job was basically to say, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. You could do that with that card. If you're playing Spider-Man, you can't, like, pull down a building, but you can if you're the Hulk or whatever, something like that. So the DM was basically very fast and loose, saying, okay, yeah, that card could be used to do that thing. And it was all about creativity and making a panel basically with each card. So
yeah, there have been diceless RPGs out there for a long time. So
yeah, for sure. Anyway, we're digressing. All right, let me give you the giant litany of our errors. It says, simply titled Pokemon. It's from Ben from Iowa, Zog, if that is his real name. Okay, he says, first off, I fully apologize for this email. I've been playing Pokemon for 20 years, U.S. release of 1998, and I was 12 with friends that introduced me. My brain is just cringing at certain things, but it's incredibly fascinating listening to people experience this game for the first time. 1. Metapod and Kakuna have a red-blue oddity that was corrected in Yellow and Forward. If you evolve Caterpie Weedle into Metapod Kakuna, they do not learn Harden. If you catch a wild Metapod or Kakuna, they only know Harden, no Tackle or Poison Sting. All the trainers you face that have Metapod or Kakuna have Metapod Kakuna that only know Harden. If you know that, you can use them to level lower level Pokemon without fear of damage. 2. we only have 30 of these, so it's just
okay.
2, Brett mentioned a trade with an NPC that wants to trade a Nidorino for a Nidorino. He actually missed a letter. The NPC wants to give you a Nidorina for a Nidorino. In Gen 1, there are 2 Nidorins, male and female. Symbol is in the name. Nidoran male evolves to Nidorino, then Nidoking with a Moonstone. Nidoran female evolves into Nidorina, then Nidoqueen, also a Moonstone. 3.
Moonstone.
Stopping evolution reasons. In Gen 1, the only reason to stop evolution is because Pokemon will learn moves at a lower level than their evolved form. So you can get Flamethrower on Charmander at a lower level than Charizard. In later generations, there's an item that boosts defense while your Pokemon holds it if your Pokemon can still evolve. This, at least at one time, was a competitive strategy. 4. TMs cannot be used on every Pokemon. Tim made a statement sounding like that is what he thought. Just wanted to make you aware.
No, I know that now for sure.
Yeah.
And they do a relatively good job at showing you that.
Yeah, they're very clear. It says able, not able, whatever. Yeah, for sure.
Same with the stones and some other things too.
Yep, the Moonstones. I saw that as well. 5, items do not get added to shops. Each shop has certain items. They tend to be better items as you progress.
Mm-hmm.
6, PP equals power points. They indicate the number of times you can use a move in battle. It sounded like you were still confused. If all of a Pokemon's moves have 0 PP, it will use Struggle, a move that damages the opponent and itself. 7, items hidden in the geography are not random. They will always be in those locations. Again, apologies for the corrections, but when you've played a series for 20 years, just realized I've been playing Mario for 29 years, you get this drive to help/inform new players. I know this is probably too much to read on the cast, so feel free to simplify or just read this last paragraph. Now, a question for you guys. Which fossil did each of you take? Thanks, Ben from Iowa.
Yeah, I mean, to the previous list, though, I think a lot of those were just us starting out. I think a bunch of those I've discovered as I've kept playing.
Yeah.
I just didn't see or realize. But thank you, Ben. You probably will want those to keep. You want to keep those coming, because we're gonna mess something up every episode. I took the Helix. I think it starts with an H. Heliox.
I think I took the same one. I think it was Helix. I did take the same one. The other one was a Dome. So
okay, just called Dome.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. I'm looking this up because I don't remember. So Helix fossil, Dome fossil, or old amber.
I haven't figured out what to do with it yet, though. And also, I have the amber. I haven't figured out what to do with that yet, though. Too.
Okay, there you go. That's our answer. I don't know how that's going to come in. No, I appreciate. I have no problem with corrections because often, sure, we need them. So yeah, I know. And we are not like we've said before, we don't go into crazy research detail by any means, on these things. It's more of a critical response to what we're playing than meant to be informed. It is actually helpful for me. A lot of this stuff just comes through when I stream. People explain stuff. I got that Nidorina distinction. Apparently the female one's a lot weaker, which is just gross. And apparently they changed that in later versions. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, there's definitely some gender issues in this game.
Yeah, I'll say
some big ones. The one question I do have for Ben that maybe he can tell us later, I can look it up, but with the stones, because there's the stone type for each or for many of the types. Moon's not the only one. There's grass stone, fire stone, whatever. But I bought a grass stone for my Ivysaur, but it didn't work. So I'm wondering if there's a level limitation for them or whatever, because it should have. The moonstones that I've used on my moon creatures, obviously that evolves them, forces an evolve, but I've used it twice. I think I found 2 of them, but it didn't work on the Ivysaur. So I was just curious.
Had you maybe already evolved?
Well, he has evolved, but I know he has one more evolution state beyond. I'm only in the second phase. I think there's a third phase. So anyway, that's a stumper for me right now. But of course, I can use the internet. So
yeah,
but it's more fun to have Ben tell us what's going on.
That's true. All right, we have a first this time. This is the first time we ever received feedback in the form of an audio file.
Cool.
This is from Bjorn Johansson. So let's listen to that now.
Hey Brett and Tim, it's your old friend Bjorn. With so much Pokemon on the podcast for the past few weeks, I finally caved and bought a Switch, and I started playing Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu today. My history with the Pokemon games is kind of similar to yours. I've only played it a little bit, some of the older games. Because I dislike random encounters as much as Tim does, I have not gotten very far in any of them. I've never even owned any of them myself. The Switch is actually my first Nintendo hardware I've ever owned. That said, being 26 years old means that I grew up with Pokemon being a cultural phenomenon. I recognize pretty much everything about it, from watching the TV show, having all the playing cards, discussing it in the schoolyard, and I did watch some of the games from over my friends' shoulders back 15 years ago when it was at the top of the zeitgeist, or at least in my circles. With Pokemon Let's Go, all of the old frustrations that I recognize from you talking about them on the podcast are gone. The game does a great job explaining itself with the way different abilities and the different grass types and water, etc. work. The encounter and catching mechanic from Pokemon Go is actually great in this game. I've already finished 2 gyms and gone through a cave, notorious parts of the older games, and I haven't felt frustrated once. It's nice to see that even conservative developers can make progress in onboarding and quality of life improvements, but perhaps one can wonder why it took them so long. Love, Bjorn. P.S. I named my Pokemon partner Mr. Pikachu, and my rival is Brett.
Oh man, that's great. That's perfect.
Yep. So there you go. So I have a Tim as my rival, and there's a Brett out there as a rival, even if you didn't name your rival Brett.
Bjorn's just smarter than I am and quicker. I should have done that, because I didn't. It's actually pretty cool how your rival, you meet your rival throughout the game multiple times,
right?
And I imagine every time I meet mine, that it's you, and I'm sure you're the same because of what you named yours. So yes. I have deep regrets that I did not name mine Brett. Would have been perfect.
That said, I'm happy to hear that they have resolved a lot of these issues. Although I will warn you now, because we may play this, it does not autosave. That is the one thing that I'm kind of still baffled. They didn't do. You still have to manually save. So, and that's, I guess it's in the manual, but who reads those anymore, right? But anyway, it's great to hear that they have done that. I know that
it's also, go ahead. It's just funny that I agree with Bjorn that it has taken them surprisingly a long time to evolve themselves. And I think that's the interesting thing, that because Let's Go is a whole sort of separate thing, right?
Yes.
The
was licensed and used by another company, and
the next actual, real in the main line Pokemon game is not out yet, and that will come out on the Switch eventually.
Yeah.
And it's
Sorry, yeah.
and it's intriguing to me to see what they're going to do after Let's Go.
Yeah,
whether they're going to still have random encounters the same way and go back to some of their old designs that they've kept for so long when all other RPGs have moved on.
Yeah, no, sorry, I misspoke. I thought you were talking about Pokemon Go, which was made by that Niantic or whatever.
No. Yeah. I meant,
no, Let's Go. Let's Go. Yeah, Let's Go is kind of a branch, right? It's not considered part of the lineage or something like that. It's sort of but it's meant to introduce new players, right? And
yeah.
You know,
well, it's close. It has similarities to some of the mechanics in Go, as far as seeing them in the world and stuff. But it should be, and there's also an iOS game that I started a while back. That's more of a grinder, but anyway.
Yeah, it's wild. I'm happy to hear that all of these sort of frustrations are gone. I mean, we're both enjoying the game from whatever it is now. A little over 20 years ago, but it's still gratifying to hear that when we flip onto the Nintendo and the Switch rather and play a bit, that it's not going to be the same thing. It will actually have changed. It'll be something interesting and new to talk about, because we'll probably do a bonus episode on that in a couple weeks, looking ahead. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So, you can shoot those emails or, as it turns out, audio files to us at devgameclub@gmail.com. You just send an MP3 or something. That's fine. Try to be either speak as quickly as an East Coaster or be brief. Either way is fine. So thanks so much for that, Bjorn. So this is our next to last episode, at least in discussing this game. That means we have to finish it by next time.
Yeah.
That's priceless right there.
Having a little bit of Final Fantasy IX flashbacks, but it's just, these are, I know you're a JRPG expert, but
no,
they're tricky. Well, you're
a JRPG file, yes.
Yeah. They're tricky games to play for the podcast because of their nature. So we may have a System Shock 2 surprise, though, as Brett said, as you may recall from System Shock 2, where I took a spec that I wasn't used to and was very uncomfortable taking, and then it ended up, making me a god by the end of the game. So maybe I've taken a strategy here that will help me over you by the end.
Yeah, it could well be. We'll find out. People will be able to watch me next weekend. I typically stream whatever we're playing on the cast on Saturday and, if necessary, on Sunday. So you'll be able to find me at twitch.tv, Brett Duville, no underscore. I'll put the link in the show notes. I should have been doing that for a while. In the meantime, you can also find the podcast on Twitter at DevGameClub, and you can find Tim there at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
Thanks so much for joining us playing this week, and good night.
Good night.